ചെറിയൊരു പട്ടണമാണ് ട്രിവാൻഡ്രം ഇപ്പോഴും in comparison to Cochin, where you seem to have 1 hour of traffic block, in many of the junctions. So I didn't anticipate that. I was caught in a block where there was an accident. So on that note, with a huge apology to Jerry particularly, let me begin. I think the title of the session is fascinating because you're also someone who speaks in a cleft tongue. Born in Goa and raised in Mumbai.
I was born in Mumbai, raised in Mumbai, but my family is from Goa.
So how much of Goa do you carry within you? What is it that that?
I think Goa sneaks up on you just as if you have been born somewhere else and you were a Malayali, say, and you were born, I don't know, in Dubai, right? And you find that you've lived all your life there. But there is a moment when suddenly you go home and there is, you see a lake and there's a crocodile sitting on the banks of that lake right outside the railway station. And you're looking at it and thinking, that's what I like. I love the fact that this festival is a celebration of diversity. Diversity is really important to my heart. I think mainly maybe because I'm a minority in a way. I never felt a minority in India until 1992, when the Babri Masjid came down. And someone actually said to me in the Times of India, a very nice woman, who traveled across the world. She'd backpacked in Europe on her own as a single woman. She said, you minorities, something, something. I don't know what the rest of the sentence was. And I suddenly felt clubbed with a whole bunch of people and outside a mainstream. And so this is, I think, what happens when you're from a small state like Goa as well. You become a Goan as your identity. And I have no problems with all these identities. Roman Catholic, there's just 4% of us or 2% of us or something like that, equally negligible. So in all those identities, English speaking, Goan, Roman Catholic, all of it, one is in a very small minority. One learns that there is something restrictive about that label. Especially when I started translating, people would ask me, do you know enough Hindi? Do you know enough Marathi? And this question would never be asked if I did not carry a Christian name. The assumption is that you don't know these languages very well. How brave it is that you are doing this. And I think, if I didn't know these languages, would I be stupid enough to start translating from them? I think not. So there are parts of that which are restrictive. But you also learn that a label is something that you must acknowledge, but you must refuse at some level also. You cannot live by the expectations of other people. You cannot say, oh, if you think I'm a Roman Catholics behave like that, I've got to behave like that. Or that if Goans behave in a certain way, then I must behave in a certain way. I'll behave the way Jerry Pinto, unlabeled, unrefined, unsynthesized Jerry Pinto wants to behave. And if it is a problem with you, take your custom somewhere else. Talk to someone else. We need to learn that we are each of us unique, right? Completely. Nature is so wonderful that she threw away the mold after she made each one of us. Not just me, but each one of you. And this is why we are interested in each other. We are interested in literature because it tells us about people who are not like us. The reason why I want to read Mukundana or I want to read M.T. Vasudevan Nair or Sachidanandan is because I want to know what other people are like. If they were like me, I would be bored. We would all get bored of each other. So then, if we are all so unique, this uniqueness then presents a challenge because we've got to learn to live with that other person's uniqueness. We've got to be able to say, okay, I'm not like you. You're very different, but I'm interested in your difference. Let's see how we can both enjoy each other's difference. We've come to a place in our society, in our culture, when we want everyone to be the same as us. We want a uniform sort of world. And thank heavens this festival is a celebration of diversity. If young people celebrate diversity, I still have hope for the future.
Even as you say that, Jerry, you've also built your own label and a brand of writing. It's a very significant, I think it's a very significant stand. Uh, but Mumbai, since we're talking about Goa and Mumbai, Mumbai has also a way of subsuming identities, making identities rather fluid, absorbing them, creating, many kinds of hybridities that are possible only in a city like Mumbai. So could you tell us something about growing up in Mumbai and what it did to your writing particularly?
Okay, there's another feeling that when you grow up in Mumbai, you grow up in a large city, which is true. It is a very large city. New York may have some similarities, London sometimes, but Bombay is just like immense because we have more people than the whole of Australia has, right? But even in the act of growing up, you are circumscribed by your locality. Right? As a child, we did not have money. So it did not mean that you could travel across the city and see exactly what you wanted. You went into town on very special days. You went with your parents. You were escorted there. And the feeling was like going to church. Some important event is happening there. You better dress well and present yourself well because, those are elite people over there. Which is stupid, but it is the way everyone, I think, sort of behaves. So when I was growing up, I grew up in a small part of Mumbai called Mahim. And I remember once I was 8 years old and someone opened a tank, an underground tank in Mahim. And everyone had told us that inside those tanks there were sharks, huge sharks that would eat you alive and stuff. I was 8 years old and you want to believe terrible things like that when you're 8 years old. So I went to peek into that tank. By the time I came home 10 minutes later, someone had called my father and told him that your son is peering into tanks, open tanks. What if he falls in and drowns? Okay, so this information had already come across the grapevine to my father. So I remember thinking at that time, I want to be somewhere where no one looks at me, where I can be anyone I want. I don't want to be my father's son, my mother's son, living in that area. I just want to be like Jerry Pinto walking through. And I think that's the intention of reinvention, where you want to reinvent yourself. And I believe a city is the space for reinvention. In the village, maybe you are known as so-and-so person whose father is so-and-so and their land is in debt and that mother did that and his sister was so-and-so. Everybody knows everything about you. When you go to the city, you become known as your trade or your profession. You are the professor of English at Institute of English. Maybe when you go back to the village, everyone knows you as Meena. As Meena, that little Meena. See how she's grown up now. She's a professor. All that comes into play, but in the village. In the city, you are the respectable professor of English who has achieved a certain level. And that's what I think the city does to all of us. It breaks your old identity. It takes the elements of that it can use. It can turn into economics. It can turn into ways to plug you into the system that is the city. Because the city is really a conurbation of energy. It's all our energy put together that makes a city. So the city looks at you as a resource. What can you add to the supply of energy, the supply of stories that fuels the city? And once your story has been picked up and you've been plugged in, then it becomes automatic. Then, processes start. Then the question is, how much energy will you throw? Give it to us.
That's a fascinating take on the individual in the city, the singer in the city, the walker in the city, the citizen in the city. Because what you said is very correct, especially in small towns and villages in Kerala, for example, where everybody knows you, everybody knows your past, everybody knows how you grew up. But the city breaks you down, as you very rightly pointed out. But aren't there also erasures in the city where maybe the city makes you forget things about you? Has this figured in your writing? Have you thought about it and, the way the city breaks you, fragments you?
Sure. I think erasure happens, it's interesting that you should ask because I've thought about this often, and erasure happens for women all the time, right? So there's one erasure that happens when your name changes when you get married. So your name is changed to your husband's name. Marathi women in Maharashtra, many of them have their first name changed as well. So that now both their names have gone. So you may have started like one of my subjects is a woman called Sushila Lotlikar. When she wrote her autobiography, her name was Vandana Mishra. Okay, this was because Sushila Lotlikar was a Brahmin, but she was one of those families that fell from grace in a way. Her father died when she was very young. Her mother then they were starving. So they went to the elders of the community and the elders said, maybe you could become a midwife. Because she was Sushila's mother was very educated only till the third standard. And midwifery, you could, with that much education, you could still become a midwife and earn a salary. Now she was dealing with with blood and sweat and feces and urine and, placentas and things like that. So naturally, she was no longer Brahmin in Brahminical eyes. But when she was about 30 and her daughter was about 13, someone threw acid on her back. So she could no longer work. And so her daughter at the age of 13 went out to become an actor. Now in classical Brahminism, again actors are not, they're not Savarna. There are certain castes from which actors come, certainly not us. So both mother and daughter realized when they were looking for someone to marry Sushila Lotlikar, that no one in the community would take her. And so she married a Mishra, who was also a slightly, how shall I put it, individualistic man. And he changed her name to Vandana. So there's an erasure that's happening.
And it's fascinating, Jerry, you mentioned that, because this is so much like our P.K. Rossi, the first woman actor in Malayalam, who had to literally run away and change her name, change her identity in order to pick up herself and her life, because the caste markers that were on her body could not be erased in the place that she was living in earlier. So it's very similar to that, Jerry. It's also very interesting you say that, because I don't know how many of you have read it, but one of the most fascinating books in Indian cinema is on Helen, and that is by none other than Jerry Pinto. And it's a fascinating book. It's a fascinating Helen the H-bomb. I mean, what a wonderful title. How did you hit upon that title? Because it's again about fragmentation and, even the fragmentation of the body itself, not just about the self, not just about identity. I mean, I have always looked at Helen after reading your book with a different kind of a perspective.
This is the interesting thing about Helen, that she resisted erasure in a certain way. Now, if you look at Hindi cinema, and please forgive me for talking about Hindi cinema, but it's inevitable. I believe Helen danced in a lot of Malayalam films and a lot of Tamil films as well. In fact, one of my friends from Chennai told me, when I came to Bombay for the first time, I realized that Helen was a Hindi film person as well. We thought she was from Tollywood, which is one of those interesting moments. But in general, a film heroine has a very short lifespan. She has like 3 years or 4 years, and then she becomes a sister, a bhabi, a mother. Take Rakhi. She did the maximum number of films with Amitabh Bachchan as his heroine. But he started as playing her younger brother in Reshma Aur Shera. Then he becomes her boyfriend and her lover in lots of films. And finally, she becomes his mother in Shakti. She's now his mother, but he's still a young man. Okay? Helen challenged that because she danced with 3 generations of Kapoors. She danced with Prithviraj Kapoor in Harish Chandra Taramati. She danced with Raj Kapoor in Annadi. And she danced with Rishi Kapoor in Phool Khile Hain Gulshan Gulshan. So she survived 3 generations. And I think that's something that absolutely needed to be looked at. how is it that a woman, I mean, and you know, when you think about what they say, item girls, they have an even shorter life. Teen char gaane bas. I mean, when you've done 3 or 4 songs, you're done. Another one comes along, you know, and takes your place. But Helen managed to survive, and she managed to survive because she was a moral pole in that universe. The vamp and the heroine were placed against each other. The vamp was gaudy in red and gold and bling, and the wigs, you
Yeah,
know,
the wigs.
and those feathers from the wigs and all kinds of things. And on the other side was the heroine, all Sida Sada, and in, you know, wrapped in white and looking demure, and as though sexuality, me? Are you mad? I'm only interested in love. And on that side, there was like a complete celebration of like how vital and bold a woman could be.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing that I've always wanted to ask you, Jerry, and this is very genuine, it's a very genuine question that comes as a reader. See, you talked about 3 generations of Helen, in a sense. How is male desire mapped onto Helen's body across ages? Because there are shifts in, you know, masculine desires, scopophilic desires, the desire to see. So if you look at Indian cinema, you see a shift in those desires, but the body remains the same. So this is something very fascinating that Helen has been able to negotiate. What kind of shifts do you see in the body itself, you know? The way Helen had to reinvent herself in order to accommodate these kinds of social shifts and desires.
You know, it's very interesting. When Sridevi arrived first in Bollywood cinema, she was laughed at as having thunder thighs. Okay? Now, thunder thighs meant that she was, like Indian women, she was Gajagamini, she who walks like the elephant, with the beautiful erotic sway that moves from side to side. That, you know, like, I mean, if I may demonstrate, the Western mode of women's walking is leads with the hip. Okay, so there is this movement, which has now become the high stepping movement of the ramp model. The Indian movement is from side to side. Okay, so it's this movement across, and this is the Gajagamini, the movement of the elephant. Now, you're looking at Helen, who is dancing in different forms. So she does Kathak in one sequence. In the next sequence, she'll be doing flamenco. In the third sequence, she'll be doing a jive. In the fourth sequence, she'll be doing a samba. Okay? And in all of these, she is doing a pretty good job. Okay? Like her Kathak is good. Her Bharatnatyam, I mean, she never did at all because there were South Indian women who would do it. But she did a lot of these other dances. And of course, there were the free form and what you might call the Bollywood style. Right? In all of these, the demand on the body is very different, right? Flamenco is easiest for us because it actually is Kathak that went abroad to Spain and came back to us as flamenco in a dress and whatnot. But to move from a demand of a body in full lusciousness, that is, if you look at our models, then you have Ajanta, you have Ellora, you have the carvings on the temples, where the women are full-bodied. I'm trying my best to be as politically correct as possible. I hope this is not offending anybody. But this is exactly the opposite of what is needed when you are doing a jive. Because there the body has to be slender. The body has to be fitted into a directionality of clothes that is from up to down, right? Whereas our clothes are from side to side. The lehenga opens out that way, right? Whereas the pantsuit holds you this way. So it's very interesting. It's a lovely question, and I wish you'd asked me before I wrote the book, because then I would have done a chapter on Helen in motion. Helen challenging notions of what is accepted motion in dancing, which, I think our cinemas have always been very open to diversity. in the sense that you'll always have a moment. Now, even in Malayalam cinema, popular Malayalam cinema and popular Tamil cinema, where the hero and heroine do a dance sequence that looks very much like Bollywood. And but there is another dance sequence that is very much authentically, so it is kind of a way of saying we can do that as well, but you're also doing this.
But from your reply, I was fascinated by your reply actually, Jerry, because you're talking about music in language, you're talking about music in representation, and the cadences, the flow, the ebb, all these things are there in some of your poetry, I think. So have you consciously tried to pick up this music and put it into, what is the rhyme scheme? How do you write poetry? Do you think of music when you write poetry?
Okay, almost everything I have to say that I do about the creative world, Meena, I have a very, I have a good story for. Like I'm very aware that we are all storytellers, and so I'm constantly refining the story of the story. Like, how did I come to write that novel? And actually, in the working of it, you're shooting blind. You're just working into a fog. Like there's something you want to say. There's an itch that you need to scratch, and the only way to scratch that is to scratch words onto a sheet of paper and to see what happens with them. And obviously, the first thing that happens is the complete collapse of the idea, the failure of the idea, because the idea is numinous, it is large, it is big, it is demanding, it wants everything out of you. It wants your soul to be in those words. It wants your entire history. It wants all your learning, and it wants your right brain, your left brain, your heart, your gut, your sinew. It wants everything in that poem. And the word is a small thing that cannot carry that much. But in combination, it can start doing something. And when you have finished, you know you have finished, and there is no feeling so beautiful. But it is not like, I wish there were a way that I knew that I wrote poems, because then I would do it. Then I would do it regularly and make loads of lovely poems. But each time I make what I think is a poem, and people may disagree, people may feel, that's one of the things about diversity. You've got to realize that everyone's not going to love your poetry. Most the pity they should, but you realize that. And you then have to say to yourself, I'm going to start again with this experiment in language. 98% of them fail. They just go nowhere. They just become scratchy words on a page. They just become failed ideas. But those 2%, that 2% that actually works, keeps you going for the rest of your life. Okay, I think most poets will tell you that they write many, many more poems than they actually publish. Many, many more things. And one of the things that frightens me is how we have started doing unpublished poems of poets who are dead, putting those out, maybe from drafts and stuff like that. I've started destroying my drafts. I don't want anyone to see those. I don't want anyone to know how bad I can be when I'm off beat, when I'm just trying to write a poem to write a poem, rather than because genuinely the spirit is moving me.
I have two questions. One with regard to what you said right now about poetry. But then, I don't know, I was also brought up in the north and then I came south. So we are all translated beings. Goa, Mumbai, Ranchi, Kerala, whatever be the case. There is a sense of translatedness to all of us, at various levels, I think. So is it this feeling of translatedness that first prompted you on to being a translator? What is it that fascinated you? Because normally, very well published authors might not go into translation at all.
Okay, I have to say two things. The first is that it's a lovely thing that you suggested, translatedness, because we're always in motion. and therefore the soundscape becomes very different, and then you're trying to adjust to that soundscape. Like, I mean, one of the things about coming to South India, you- uh, beneath the Vindhyas, is that ache that I feel when I'm in public transport and I can't understand what people are saying. You know, I don't speak Malayalam, I don't speak Kannada, I don't speak Tamil, most the pity. And so therefore, like, I mean, or Telugu or Tulu. And so each time I'm in, say, Chennai, or I'm in Thiruvananthapuram, or I'm in Kochi, I'm thinking, I wish I could understand what people were saying so I could eavesdrop on conversations. Because for a writer, that's gold. That's what you want to listen to. So the translatedness, I think, of one's existence is most pointed when one cannot understand what is going on. You're standing at a door of sound, but the door won't open and let you into meaning. But on the second level, I think, for me, all acts of speech are basically acts of translation. Because you start with an idea that you want to communicate, and then you have to look into your repository of words and find meaning or find a word that represents what you are feeling. Now, this is impossible because feelings are so different and so magical and so numinous and so various that if you had a dictionary for one person's feelings, it would be the size of the universe. Okay? So what you are doing then is you are taking this feeling that you have and looking in whatever language you know and saying, okay, well, this word doesn't quite fit, but it's okay, it will do the work right now. Love is a very good example. I mean, you know, if you look at the word love, we say, I love my mother, we say, I love Idiappa, you say, I love Kochi, you say, I love music. All these four are very different loves. And I love my girlfriend. These are the 5 different loves you can think of. The love of your mother, the love of food, the love of a place, the love of artistic form, and the love of a person. And now break down the love of a person. You can love a person platonically. You can love a person for what they make you feel. And you can love a person erotically. Now, and this all has to be scooped up and piled into this one 4-letter word called love. What we expect of language is amazing. That we get any communication done or any meaning out of language is just extraordinary. I mean, it's a miracle. It's such an everyday miracle that we've forgotten about.
I think one of my favorite quotes is from Hamlet. Words, words, words. You know, and you juggle with words as a writer, as a translator, as a poet, and it's with a tinge of envy, that I look at you. But again, one of Jerry's, my personal favorite, M and the Big Whom, where you talk about mental landscapes and the untranslatability of those landscapes, right? How did you think about, is there something that you would like to add to that book today? Because I think it's something that is haunting many of us, in the academia. We cannot understand students. In the family, for example, there are huge blocks of silences. So the writing of that book, how did you arrive at that idea? What is it that you would add to it today?
One of the things about a book when it is out in the public sphere is that it becomes an artifact of other people's imaginations. It becomes, I have always said, a book becomes a book when someone reads it, right? Until then, it's just a piece of paper, nicely bound into the form of a codex with some black marks on it. The reading, the act of reading, when someone picks up that book and the words come out of it and register in their heads and they make it their own, that makes it a novel. I know that there are many, like the idea of the director's cut, where the filmmaker, says, oh, but, the editor or the producer changed this and I'd like you to see my cut. I often see that director's cut and I almost can't see the difference. I'm not sure. I know that's probably very important to the director. I'm fine with that, but I can't see the difference. I think if I were to add now to M and the Big Whom,
I think it's a very significant book of yours.
Thank you so much. I know it. I feel this too also. I would not play with it at all. But what I would do is, I would probably be more attentive to the fact that there is a huge amount of stress that carers take on willy-nilly. In India, it is almost considered bad form to have someone else look after an ailing member of the family. And that's not right. Because what happens is, if there's one ailing member and the family begins to look after that ailing member, it is generally the woman who does the heavy lifting. And now studies are showing that if, for instance, an Alzheimer's patient is looked after by someone, they tend to live shorter lives because of the stress of actually looking after someone. So I have the feeling that I would pay more attention to that kind of cost.
I think on that note, let me open up this session to the audience. Any questions that the audience would like to raise?
Otherwise, we can go on chatting until time is up, or we can, because we are running late, we can close also.
Let's see if we have any questions. Otherwise, we can continue with the chat. It's fine. It's really so lovely to listen to you both. So, ചോദ്യങ്ങളുണ്ടോ ആർക്കെങ്കിലും പ്രിപ്പയർ ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ടോ? അപ്പോൾ കേട്ടതിൽ നിന്നും എന്തെങ്കിലും കാര്യങ്ങൾ മെൻഷൻ ചെയ്യാനുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് ചോദിക്കാം. അതല്ല എങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് ഈ ചാറ്റ് കണ്ടിന്യൂ ചെയ്യാം.
Questions can be asked in Malayalam as well, and she'll translate.
That's it. മലയാളത്തിൽ ചോദിക്കാം. നമ്മൾ മുപ്പരടുത്ത് പറയും എന്താ നമ്മുടെ ചോദ്യം എന്നുള്ളതിനെ കുറിച്ചിട്ട്. അപ്പോൾ ഈ ഒരു സെഷൻ ഇടയിൽ ഒരുപാട് കാര്യങ്ങൾ പറഞ്ഞു. അതിന് ഒപ്പം തന്നെ ഹെലൻ എന്ന് പറയുന്ന നമ്മളെല്ലാവരെയും വിസ്മയിപ്പിച്ച, ഐ ഡോണ്ട് നോ വെദർ ദ ന്യൂ ജനറേഷൻ is that much aware of, I mean, they are not familiar with Helen, I hope. സോ പുതിയ ആൾക്കാർക്ക് ഹെലനെ എത്രത്തോളം പരിചയമുണ്ടെന്ന് അറിയില്ല. പക്ഷേ എൻ്റെയൊക്കെ ചെറുപ്പത്തിൽ ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് ഒരുപാട് എന്താണ് ഇത്ര ഭംഗിയായിട്ടാണ് ഇവർ ഈ ഡാൻസ് പെർഫോമൻസും ആ ഒരു മൂവ്മെൻറ്റ്സും എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിലൊക്കെ ചിന്തിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. സോ ഹെലൻ മാത്രമല്ല, ദേ ആർ മെനി ടു ആഡ് ഓൺ വിത്ത് ഹർ. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു പെർട്ടിക്കുലർ ഒരു ടോപ്പിക്, ഞാൻ ജസ്റ്റ് ഒരു ടോപ്പിക്ക് പറഞ്ഞത് മാത്രമേ ഉള്ളൂ. അപ്പാർട്ട് ഫ്രം ദാറ്റ് മറ്റു കാര്യങ്ങളും ഇവിടെ സംസാരിക്കപ്പെട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. എന്തിനെ കുറിച്ചിട്ടെങ്കിലും ചോദ്യങ്ങളുണ്ട് എങ്കിൽ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെ അടുത്ത് നമുക്ക് ചോദിക്കാം. അതല്ല എങ്കിൽ വി ക്യാൻ കണ്ടിന്യൂ വിത്ത് ദ ചാറ്റ്.
ഹെലൻ്റെ സിനിമകൾ കണ്ട ആരുമില്ലേ? വളരെ സിഗ്നിഫിക്കൻ്റ് ആയിട്ടുള്ളൊരു ബുക്കാണ് ജെറിയുടെ. 3 തലമുറകൾ, ഇന്ത്യൻ സിനിമയുടെ 3 തലമുറകളായിട്ടുള്ള ഹീറോസിൻ്റെ കൂടെ ഡാൻസ് കളിച്ച എച്ച് ബോംബ് എന്നാണ് ജെറി ഹെലനെ വിളിക്കുന്നത്. ജെറിയുടെ പുസ്തകത്തിൽ അവാർഡ് കിട്ടിയ, നാഷണൽ അവാർഡ് കിട്ടിയ വളരെ പ്രസിദ്ധമായ ഒരു സിനിമാ ഗ്രന്ഥമാണ്.
കുറച്ചുകൂടി എളുപ്പത്തിൽ ഐ ജസ്റ്റ് മെൻഷൻ അനദർ തിങ്. സി, ഇപ്പം വിദ്യാ ബാലന് നാഷണൽ അവാർഡ് കിട്ടിയിരിക്കുന്ന ഡേർട്ടി പിക്ചർ എന്ന് പറയുന്ന മൂവി, ഐ കാൻ ജസ്റ്റ് കമ്പയർ ഹർ വിത്ത് ഹെലൻ. ബട്ട് സ്റ്റിൽ സിൽക്ക് സ്മിത എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഏറ്റവും പ്രിയപ്പെട്ട ഒരു നടിയെ കുറിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ബയോഗ്രഫി എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിലാണ് പറയപ്പെടുന്നത്. പക്ഷേ അതൊക്കെ മേലെ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് പോലെയാണ് ഹെലൻ, റൈറ്റ്? അപ്പോൾ സാർ പറഞ്ഞ മാതിരി തന്നെ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അവർ തന്നെ പറഞ്ഞ മാതിരി തന്നെ 3 തലമുറകളോടൊപ്പം അഭിനയിച്ചു. പക്ഷേ ഇപ്പം അമിതാഭ് ബച്ചൻ സാറിൻ്റെ കൂടെ അഭിനയിച്ച സമയത്ത് ഇറ്റ് വാസ് ബീൻ മെൻഷൻ ലൈക്ക് പെങ്ങളായിട്ട് അഭിനയിച്ചു, അത് കഴിഞ്ഞതിന് ശേഷം കാമുകിയായിട്ട് അഭിനയിച്ചു, പിന്നെ അത് അമ്മയായിട്ടും അഭിനയിക്കേണ്ടി വരുന്നൊരു സിറ്റുവേഷൻ. അതായത് സ്ത്രീകളുടെ പ്രായം മാറുന്നു, അവർ പെങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നും കാമുകയാവുന്നു, ഭാര്യയാവുന്നു, അത് കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ട് അമ്മയാവുന്നു. ബട്ട് അറ്റ് ദ സെയിം ടൈം ദ മെയിൽ, അത് അങ്ങനെ തന്നെ പ്രായം കൂടുന്നില്ല, ആളുടെ ആ ഇമേജിനൊരു മാറ്റമില്ല. അവരെപ്പോഴും നിത്യഹരിത നായകന്മാരായിട്ടും കാമുകന്മാരുമായിട്ട് തന്നെ നിൽക്കുന്നു എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞൊരു ഐറണി ഇവിടെ മെൻഷൻ ചെയ്യപ്പെട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. അതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് പോലും ആർക്കും ഒന്നും ചോദിക്കാനില്ല എന്നുള്ളൊരു കാര്യത്തെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് ഒരു സൂചന. യു ക്യാൻ പ്ലീസ്, ഇറ്റ്സ് ഓൾ ഓപ്പൺ. വളരെ ഫ്രണ്ട്ലി ആയിട്ടുള്ളൊരു ചാറ്റ് ആയിരുന്നു, ഐ ഹോപ്പ്.
Meantime, as they are thinking about the questions, Jerry, what is the current project? What is the current book that you're working on? Anything that you would love to share with us?
There's a book called Apno Ke Beech Ajnabi. It's a Hindi book about, it's the translation of the title is Stranger in Among My Own People. And it is a series of short essays about what it feels like to be a Muslim in the India of today. And one of the things that I've always worried about is that when we talk about secularism or the ideals that are close to us, we couch this in such a high-minded, abstract way that people often don't get the point because they just get bored. I'm not academic shaming you. I'm just saying that we need to have just ordinary, everyday language that addresses these problems. This book had it in Hindi, so I've translated it and I'm very excited about it
Really
coming out soon.
excited because only the other day I was talking to my students, and I think the idea of secularism has changed from one age to the other. And even today, when we speak about secularism, I think the idea of secularism is different in Kerala from the idea of secularism in Delhi, for example, or some other place. So it is very contextual. It is rooted in the very concrete and the very material context of its imagination, I think. So I'm looking forward to the book. Who is the publisher?
You know, I think secularism works when you've forgotten about it. Like in Kerala, I think Kerala is a good example of how three major religions work together almost seamlessly and without thought. You know, the Muslim, the Christian.
That is what we make you feel
Yeah.
is happening. It might not necessarily
Absolutely, I think there's a lot of energy that goes into actually managing those differences. But Kerala has chosen to actually manage them efficiently, to try and manage them, and that is important. You're never going to have a seamless world where everybody, you know, accepts each other confidently and easily. I think, you know, when my question always is, say for instance, if your brother turns out to be gay, how do you tell your grandparents this? How does he come out to his grandparents? Because there's sometimes no shared language of that kind of...
Even for that, Kerala has invented a language. We have the language of, advertisement. Bhima came out with an advertisement on gay marriage, which was very fascinating because you can get married only with the gold from Bhima, and then you try the nuptials. So you come back to certain institutions again.
Absolutely. Which is, I think, a good point at which for us.
One last question. Which is your favorite food in Kerala, just on a personal
All
note?
fish. Absolutely all fish. I
Go
come
in.
from a coastal city. I come from a coastal state, Goa. And so when I come to Kerala, all I want to do is eat more fish and different varieties each time.
Ma'am, we have a question.
Yeah, sure, please.
മാം മലയാളത്തിൽ ചോദിക്കാം എന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്.
സാർ ഒരു എഴുത്തുകാരൻ, അതുപോലെ തന്നെ കഥാകൃത്ത്, പത്രപ്രവർത്തകൻ എന്നീ രീതികളിൽ നോക്കുമ്പോൾ ഇന്ത്യയിലെ നിഷ്പക്ഷ മാധ്യമ പ്രവർത്തനത്തെക്കുറിച്ച് സാറിൻ്റെ ഒരു അഭിപ്രായം എന്താണ്?
He's asking whether you think there is an impartial kind of a journalism in India today, because you have also straddled different roles. So what is your take on that?
I don't think there was ever an impartial journalism anywhere in the world, but I think it is very true that today there is more and more of a bowing down to the powers that be. But this is not only in journalism. I remember there was a time when if you were a stand-up comedian, you could make a joke about politicians and everyone would laugh. Today, if you make a joke about politicians, almost everyone seems to think you mean my politician of choice, and then someone goes to the local police station and files a complaint. The police don't seem to be aware anymore that there is freedom of speech or that this is a democracy and we get to express our views, and they come and arrest you. And this makes journalism now, ordinary everyday journalism, suddenly into an act of courage. Now I cannot tell anyone how courageous they should be. We all have to make that decision ourselves. So if we want our journalists to be courageous, we need to support them in clear and obvious ways. We need to look for objective journalists, follow them, read them more, pay more attention to them, and when they are thrown into jail, write them letters, send them books, something to remind them that they have not been forgotten.
This is the land of Kunjan Nambiar, who took satire to another level. Yeah. So what Jerry basically is saying, നമ്മൾ ഒരു കാലത്തും ഇമ്പാർഷ്യൽ ആയിട്ടുള്ളൊരു ജേർണലിസം ഇല്ലായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷേ ഇന്ന് പവേഴ്സ് കൂടുതൽ സ്ട്രോങ് ആകുമ്പോൾ ഒരുപക്ഷെ ജേർണലിസം എന്നുള്ളൊരു ഫീൽഡ് മാത്രമല്ല ഇമ്പാർഷ്യാലിറ്റി ഇല്ലാതാവുന്നത്, നമുക്ക് ചുറ്റിനും പലതിലും അതില്ലാതാവുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പം മേ ബി ഇഫ് ഐ സേ വി ഗെറ്റ് ദ ജേർണലിസ്റ്റ് ദാറ്റ് വി ഡിസേർവ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ നമ്മളുടെ മാധ്യമപ്രവർത്തകർ ഇങ്ങനെ ആകുന്നതിൽ നമുക്കൊരു പങ്കുണ്ട്, ഇമ്പാർഷ്യാലിറ്റി ഇല്ലെങ്കിൽ എന്നാണ് ജെറി പറയുന്നത്.
മലയാളത്തിലാണ്. ജെറി സാർ ലാസ്റ്റ് പറഞ്ഞു വെച്ചു, കേരളം എന്ന ഈ ഒരു സംസ്ഥാനത്തിൽ 3 മതത്തിൽപ്പെട്ടവർ പ്രശ്നങ്ങളൊന്നും ഇല്ലാണ്ട് മുന്നോട്ട് പോകുന്നുണ്ടെന്ന്. അത് വെറും ഉപരിപ്ലവമായ മാത്രമായ ഒരു കാര്യമാണെന്ന് സാറിനോടൊന്ന് പറയാൻ ഞാൻ ആഗ്രഹിക്കുകയാണ്.
ഓൾറെഡി പറഞ്ഞു.
അതിന് ഏറ്റവും വലിയ തെളിവാണ് തൃശ്ശൂരിലെ BJPയുടെ വിജയം. കാരണം മുസ്ലിം വിരുദ്ധത ക്രിസ്ത്യാനികൾക്കിടയിലും ഉണ്ട്. അത് നല്ല രീതിയിൽ വർക്കൗട്ട് ആവാത്തത് കേരളത്തിലൊരു മതേതര മനസ്സുള്ളത് കൊണ്ടാണ്. ഏത് നിമിഷവും പൊട്ടാവുന്ന ഒരു ബോംബാണ് കേരളത്തിൻ്റെ മതേതരത്വം. 1976 ഭരണഘടനയിൽ സോഷ്യലിസവും മതേതരത്വവും എഴുതി ചേർത്തിട്ടുണ്ട് എന്നതുകൊണ്ട് മാത്രം 48 വർഷങ്ങൾക്ക് മുമ്പ് നമ്മൾ കുറച്ചെങ്കിലും ഈ സ്റ്റേറ്റ് വൃത്തിയിൽ പോകുന്നുണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ ഏത് നിമിഷവും പൊട്ടാവുന്ന ഒരു ബോംബാണ് എന്ന് തിരുത്താൻ ഞാൻ ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്നു.
What he says, Jerry, thank you. What he says is the secularism that you feel exists in Kerala exists on the outer surface. Inside, secularism is under threat. And I think it is everywhere, all around us, but he feels a little fear that in Kerala, it is slowly burning inside, you know.
I think in general, everywhere, we have some fear of the other. Okay, there is always a fear of that which is different from us. It is how we moderate our behavior and how we moderate our speech that becomes important. And this is where, shame plays a role. There used to be a time when you did not want to be seen as non-secular. You wanted to be seen as the kind of persons who accepted everybody. These days, secular has become the word secular. So I think what we need to do is, while I completely get it, it is probably a deep threat in this society. We need all of us to be examining ourselves and asking ourselves whether our feeling for somebody is based on the fact that they are a different caste, creed, community, skin color, geographical location, or whether it is something that is just a disagreement between the two of us. There is no harm disliking a person, but we do ourselves great damage when we dislike a community.
ഒരു കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയെ മൊത്തം വെറുക്കുമ്പോഴാണ് ഇതിൽ പല പ്രശ്നങ്ങളും വരുന്നത്. അപ്പം നമ്മൾ സ്വയം ആർജിക്കേണ്ട ചില അതിർവരമ്പുകളിനോടുള്ള റെസ്പെക്റ്റ് ഇവിടെ ഉണ്ടാവണം. അത് എവിടെയാണെങ്കിലും. കേരളത്തിലിപ്പം ഈ ഭീഷണി കുറച്ച് കുറവാണെന്ന് തന്നെയാണ് ഇപ്പോഴും ജെറി പറയുന്നത്. പക്ഷെ എന്നിരുന്നാലും നമ്മൾ അതീവ ജാഗ്രതയോടാണ് ഇതിനെ നേരിടേണ്ടത് എന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു. ഓൺ ദാറ്റ് നോട്ട്, ഐ തിങ്ക് ഹിയർ ഇസ് there is a session by P. Sainath here. I think that's the next session. I'm sure that it's a session that you would all love to listen to because there'll be so many things. Maybe you should ask him those questions. നിങ്ങൾ അത് സായിനാഥിനോടും കൂടെ ചോദിക്കണം, സാറിനോടും കൂടെ ചോദിക്കണം എന്നാണ് അദ്ദേഹം പറയുന്നത്. On that note, I think here is a writer. We discussed his poetry, we discussed his silences, the cadences of his words, of growing up, of multiple citizenship, not in the strict sense of the term, but of belonging, of becoming something else in other cities. We discussed his translations, his writings in the future. I think it was a very warm kind of and a very candid kind of a discussion, Jerry. Thank you so much.